What happens when an HOA president's entitlement turns a homeowner's pride into a battleground? A single tire track across a cherished lawn sparks a calculated defense that delivers a $1,200 lesson in boundaries. This is the story of how one man transformed his front yard into a fortress, proving that sometimes protecting what's yours means playing by their rules better than they do. I paid $1,200 to destroy a Mercedes. I did it without hesitation. The luxury car of the HOA president had ruined my lawn for the 14th time in just one summer. Even worse, I was the one being threatened with fines for improper lawn maintenance. But the 15th attempt transformed into a costly lesson she'll never forget. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below if you've faced your own neighborhood tyrants. I never imagined creating a completely legal car trap beneath my grass. But sometimes, when battling a powerful Karen, you need plans B through Z ready. Welcome to the story of how I transformed an ordinary lawn into the perfect defense against entitled drivers. 6 months ago, I achieved the American dream: home ownership. After years of saving every penny from my remote software engineering job, I purchased a modest corner house in a quiet Florida suburb. The neighborhood seemed perfect, with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. I spent the first few weekends fixing up the place, paying special attention to the front lawn. Those hours spent gardening with my late father had instilled in me a deep appreciation for a well-kept yard. Each blade of grass I planted felt like a small tribute to him, a connection to memories I cherished. The property wasn't perfect. The previous owners had neglected some maintenance, and the corner location meant more exposure to traffic and pedestrians. But it was mine. I'd spend evenings after work with dirt under my fingernails, meticulously edging the lawn, installing solar-powered pathway lights, and planting native Florida flowers that would thrive in the humid climate. My father had taught me that your home's exterior was a reflection of your character, and I wanted mine to reflect care and attention to detail. The lawn, in particular, became my passion project, a lush green canvas that I nurtured with the dedication of an artist. Neighbors would occasionally stop to compliment my improvements. "Place looks better than it has in years," an elderly man walking his corgi told me one evening. "Good to see someone taking pride in their property again." These small interactions made me feel like part of the community, like I belonged in this peaceful enclave where American flags decorated porches and children rode bicycles down quiet streets. The first few weeks were uneventful. Neighbors waved politely, and I felt like I was settling in. Then I met Deborah Thompson. She appeared at my door one Saturday morning with a basket of muffins and a binder labeled Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association Guidelines. With a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she introduced herself as the HOA president and the local real estate agent who had helped so many families find their forever homes in the neighborhood for the past 15 years. "You really should join us for the community barbecue next weekend," she said, not so much inviting as instructing. "It's where all the important neighborhood connections happen." When I politely explained that I had a work deadline, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, I'm sure you'll prioritize community events eventually. We all have to do our part." I flipped through the binder after she left, slightly overwhelmed by the 34 pages of regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the maximum height of garden gnomes at 12 inches. In case you were wondering, something about Deborah's perfectly coiffed appearance and the calculating look in her eyes left me unsettled. There was an artificial quality to her friendliness that reminded me of sales pitches I'd encountered during my house hunting journey. All surface charm concealing a relentless agenda. The real trouble began a week later when Deborah hosted a small gathering for some HOA committee members. Several cars lined the street, including her pristine white Mercedes. When the meeting ended, I watched from my home office window as she slid into her luxury sedan and, instead of backing out and turning around properly, cut directly across the corner of my lawn to make an easier exit. Tire tracks carved through my grass, leaving ugly brown ruts in their wake. I approached her the next day, keeping my tone friendly. "Hey, Deborah, I noticed someone drove across my lawn yesterday. It tore up some of the new grass I just planted." Her expression never changed. "Oh, that was probably me. It's just the corner of the lawn, dear. Everyone uses that shortcut to turn around more easily." The previous owners never minded. Then, with a dismissive wave, "Just part of living on a corner lot. You'll get used to it." I didn't want to get used to it. That evening, my next-door neighbor, Michael Harrison, stopped by to introduce himself. A former military man turned auto mechanic. Michael had the weathered look of someone who'd seen his share of battles. When I mentioned my interaction with Deborah, his expression darkened. "You've met our local dictator, I see," he said, leaning against my porch railing. "Word of advice: don't cross her. Deborah has a habit of making life extremely difficult for residents who don't fall in line." He explained that his ex-wife couldn't take the constant harassment after he challenged one of Deborah's ridiculous fines. That was the beginning of the end for our marriage. I asked why other residents didn't stand up to her. Michael explained that my house sat in a relatively isolated corner of the neighborhood, with few witnesses to Deborah's lawn shortcuts. Plus, Deborah had made examples of past complainers, hitting them with so many violations and fines that several families had eventually moved away. That night, I installed security cameras with audio recording capabilities, making sure they covered every angle of my front yard. "At least I'll have evidence if things get worse," I muttered to myself as I adjusted the settings. They did get worse over the next 3 weeks. My cameras captured Deborah driving across my lawn no fewer than 8 times. Each crossing left deeper ruts, killing more grass. I replanted twice, only to watch my efforts destroyed again. I placed a small "Please don't drive on the lawn" sign at the corner. The next morning, my cameras recorded Deborah stopping her car, removing the sign, and tossing it into a public trash can a block away. When I checked my mailbox the following day, I found an official HOA violation notice citing deteriorated lawn conditions inconsistent with neighborhood standards, with a $50 weekly fine until corrected. The signature at the bottom was Deborah's, written with the flourish of someone who enjoyed wielding power. That evening, I sat on my front steps, staring at my damaged lawn. The violation notice crumpled in my fist. Looking at the ruined grass brought back memories of kneeling beside my father as a child, learning how to nurture living things. No one has the right to destroy what we care about. "Dad," I whispered to myself, with renewed determination. I pulled out the 78-page HOA rulebook and began reading every line, searching for anything that might help me defend my property. I was highlighting Section 4.3.2 about homeowner property rights when Michael knocked on my door, carrying 2 bottles of beer and wearing a mysterious smile. "Hey, I have an interesting idea to solve your problem. Have you ever heard of landscape obstacles?" Michael's landscape obstacles concept was brilliant in its simplicity. According to HOA regulations, Section 5.9, decorative boulders were permitted as lawn ornaments, provided they met certain aesthetic guidelines. We spent that weekend selecting 3 tasteful rocks from a local garden center, placing them strategically along the corner of my lawn, beautiful enough to comply with HOA standards, while positioned perfectly to prevent any car from cutting across. "These aren't just rocks," Michael explained as we carefully positioned the first boulder, a handsome piece of granite with subtle blue-gray streaks. "They're a statement. You're establishing boundaries without breaking any rules." We selected rocks large enough to deter vehicles, but not so massive that they looked out of place in a residential setting. Each one cost nearly $100, but it felt like a worthwhile investment to protect my property. The installation process took most of Saturday. We dug shallow depressions for each rock to sit securely, ensuring they were partially embedded in the soil for stability. I took extensive photographs documenting the placement, measuring the distance from property lines and sidewalks to ensure compliance with every possible regulation. Michael even brought over the neighborhood architectural guidelines to confirm we were following all aesthetic requirements about natural landscaping elements. Document everything, Michael advised as we worked. Take photos before, during, and after installation. Note the date and time. Measure distances from property lines. Deborah will look for any technicality to claim you violated some obscure rule. His paranoia seemed excessive at first, but I would soon be grateful for his foresight. The day after installation, I spotted Deborah slowly driving past my house, her face pinched with obvious displeasure. She couldn't complain, though. I had deliberately chosen rocks that matched others already displayed in the neighborhood, including her own decorative stone garden feature. But Deborah Thompson wasn't one to accept defeat. A week later, I noticed one of the boulders had been shifted several inches from its original position, with fresh scratch marks across its surface. My security camera revealed what had happened. In the early morning hours, Deborah had arrived with a team of landscapers, announcing loudly that they were there to provide complimentary lawn maintenance as a community HOA service. While the workers trimmed my grass, she instructed them to access all areas properly for even cutting, which conveniently involved moving my strategically placed rocks under the guise of professional landscaping. "See how she operates," Michael said, reviewing the footage with me. Nothing outright illegal, always a plausible explanation. The landscapers probably had no idea they were being used as pawns. The video clearly showed Deborah directing a confused-looking worker to just nudge that rock over a bit so they could properly maintain all areas of the lawn. The worker, wearing a uniform from Green Dreams Landscaping, appeared uncomfortable, but followed instructions from someone he likely assumed had authority. I enhanced my security system, adding motion-activated floodlights around the perimeter of my yard. Michael helped me install them, chuckling as we tested the sensors. "You're about to move up on Deborah's enemy list," he warned. "Trust me, she keeps score." He wasn't wrong. The following week, an emergency HOA meeting was called to discuss proposed amendments to the landscape decoration size limitations. Citing community safety concerns, I attended the meeting, where Deborah avoided making eye contact as she proposed restrictions that would effectively prohibit anything large enough to stop a car. When my turn to speak came, I calmly presented my case, including video evidence of repeated lawn damage. "I'm simply trying to protect my property," I concluded, noticing several neighbors nodding in agreement. Amanda Williams, a lawyer who served on the HOA board, suggested tabling the amendment pending further review, visibly irritating Deborah, who clearly expected immediate approval. As the meeting disbanded, Deborah brushed past me, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine. Later that night, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "In this neighborhood, we have ways of dealing with people who don't fit in." I reported the message to the local police, who took my information but explained that without explicit threats, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning revealed the escalation. All three of my decorative boulders had vanished overnight. My once recovering lawn was now churned into mud, and an official-looking HOA sign stood planted in the middle. "Area under repair. No trespassing." Someone had repositioned my security cameras, pointing them away from the lawn, leaving no video evidence of the perpetrators. I immediately called Amanda, asking about the sign. "The HOA didn't authorize any repair signs for your property," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful, Ryan. They're watching all of us." The concern in her tone suggested she knew more than she felt comfortable saying over the phone. I was taking photographs of the damage when Deborah's white Mercedes cruised slowly past. Her window lowered, and she offered a saccharine smile. "Oh my, your lawn looks terrible. You should be careful about getting additional fines." I didn't respond, just continued documenting the damage. My mother always said, "Never wrestle with a pig. You'll get dirty, and the pig will enjoy it." But in that moment, something shifted inside me. It was time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. Over the next few days, I meticulously documented everything. Every email, every photograph, every video clip went into a detailed file, I created a comprehensive timeline dating back to my first encounter with Deborah, noting every interaction and incident with precise timestamps. I organized photographs chronologically, showing the progressive damage to my lawn alongside my repeated restoration efforts. I transcribed every relevant conversation captured by my security cameras, highlighting particularly damning statements. The resulting documentation filled a 3-inch binder that I labeled Property Dispute Evidence and stored in a fireproof safe, a level of organization that reflected both my software engineer's mindset and my growing understanding that this conflict would require detailed records. Documentation is your best weapon, Michael advised as we reviewed the material together. Deborah relies on people getting frustrated and giving up. Most folks don't have the patience to fight systematically. He helped me identify the most compelling evidence to highlight in my formal complaint to the HOA management company, the independent company that theoretically oversaw the HOA board's activities. My submission included timestamps, photographs, and video evidence showing Deborah's repeated trespassing. The complaint included audio recordings from my security cameras, clearly capturing her instructions to maintenance workers to move my legally placed landscaping features. Amanda discreetly supported my complaint, suggesting an investigation into potential abuses of HOA authority. Her support came cautiously. She admitted later that she feared Deborah's retribution, but couldn't stand watching the harassment continue. I've been documenting similar patterns for years, she confided during a hushed conversation in the grocery store parking lot, glancing nervously around to ensure no one was listening. This isn't isolated, it's systematic. Robert Miller, a retired resident and longtime friend of Deborah's husband, led the opposition, claiming I was being overly sensitive and disrupting neighborhood harmony. The emergency HOA meeting to address my complaint was tense. Residents filled the community center, many curious about the confrontation brewing between the newcomer and the established HOA president. I presented my evidence calmly and methodically. Several neighbors appeared surprised by the video footage, whispering among themselves as they watched Deborah's repeated violations. Amanda carefully laid out the relevant HOA bylaws that protected homeowners' property rights. The board's decision was nonetheless disappointing. Insufficient evidence to conclusively identify who had removed my landscaping features or damaged my lawn. The obvious favoritism left a bitter taste. But I wasn't finished. With Michael's help, I installed new security cameras, this time bolted permanently to my house siding, where they couldn't be easily redirected. We used industrial-grade mounting brackets and weatherproof security housings that would require power tools to remove. I even installed dummy cameras in obvious locations while hiding the real ones in more discreet spots. A technique Michael had learned during his military service. We replanted the lawn together, joined by several neighbors who had witnessed the meeting and seemed quietly supportive of my stand against Deborah's tactics. "This isn't just about your lawn anymore," Michael said as we worked. "People are tired of living under her thumb, but most are too afraid to do anything about it." Deborah's response came swiftly. A flurry of new violation notices citing non-compliant front door color and improper garden arrangement. I addressed each claim precisely according to the rulebook, photographing and documenting my compliance, yet more notices arrived, each for increasingly trivial issues. A garbage can left visible for 30 minutes after collection. Holiday lights removed one day past the allowed time frame. A barely visible oil spot on my driveway from a visitor's car. "This is how she operates," Michael explained one evening. "Death by 1,000 paper cuts. She'll keep sending violations until you either surrender or move away. She's done it to at least 3 families I know of." I consulted with a lawyer about potential harassment claims, but the fees for pursuing such a case would run into thousands of dollars. A steep price for what many would view as a petty neighborhood dispute. The situation reached another turning point late one night when my motion sensors activated. The security footage showed Deborah's Mercedes deliberately driving across my newly replanted lawn, but this time her tire caught on something unseen, causing an immediate flat. The camera captured her furious expression as she stepped out to examine the damage, then reluctantly called for assistance. When I saw her stranded on my property, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay inside and let her deal with the consequences of her actions. Instead, I grabbed my phone and jacket, recording as I approached to offer help. I know I could turn my back, I thought to myself, but I was raised to believe in decency. I'll help, not because she deserves it, but because I do. I wanted to be the better person. Even as I ensured every moment was captured on video, having car trouble? I asked politely, keeping my tone neutral as I approached. Deborah's face flushed with anger. Something punctured my tire. I think you put something in the ground deliberately. Her accusatory tone carried clearly in the night air, captured perfectly by my phone's recording. I'm sorry that happened, I replied calmly, panning my camera to show the deep tread marks cutting across my lawn. But you're driving on private property. This is my lawn, not a roadway. This is a public easement, she snapped. Though we both knew that was a lie. I'm going to sue you for damaging my car. I simply smiled. I'd be happy to call a tow truck for you. And I should mention that my security system records audio as well as video. Everything you're saying right now is being documented. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. You think you're so clever? When the tow truck arrived to haul away her Mercedes, Deborah shot me a venomous glare. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Henderson? She hissed under her breath. I maintained my calm smile. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Mrs. Thompson, and you should know that my cameras don't just record video. They capture audio, too. The flash of uncertainty in her eyes was deeply satisfying. That night, sleep eluded me as a radical idea took shape in my mind. If she wanted a path across my property so badly, perhaps I should provide one that would make a lasting impression. The thought both thrilled and troubled me. Was I really willing to go that far? The boundary between righteous defense and petty revenge seemed suddenly blurry, and I wondered which side of it I was about to step onto. After several sleepless nights researching local property laws and HOA regulations, I discovered a fascinating loophole. Section 7.2.1 of the County Building Code allowed homeowners to install subsurface drainage systems to protect their foundation. These systems could include metal drainage pipes installed just beneath the lawn surface. The more I researched, the more I learned about Florida's unique drainage requirements. The state's high water table and frequent heavy rainfall made proper drainage essential for protecting foundations. The County Building Code specifically mentioned that all residential structures must maintain adequate water diversion systems to prevent water intrusion and foundation damage. Homeowners were explicitly permitted to install subsurface drainage systems using materials appropriate for the soil composition and water flow patterns specific to their property. This gave homeowners significant latitude in designing these systems. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the printout of the regulation, my coffee growing cold. The idea forming in my mind was technically legal, but would it cross an ethical line? Michael found me still contemplating the question when he stopped by later that day. You look troubled, he observed, pulling up a chair. I explained my discovery and the plan taking shape. But is it too much? I'd essentially be creating a lawn that would puncture tires if driven over. Michael considered this carefully. This isn't about setting a trap for people. It's about protecting your property through legal means. She has no right to drive across your lawn in the first place. His perspective helped clarify my thinking. This wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing boundaries that Deborah had repeatedly refused to respect. I spent several days weighing the moral implications. Was I becoming the very thing I was fighting against? Someone using technicalities to harm others? The distinction seemed crucial. I wasn't setting out to damage anyone's property. I was exercising my right to protect my own property in a way that had consequences only for those who were trespassing in the first place. There was a fundamental difference between offense and defense, between targeting someone and protecting yourself from their targeting. After careful consideration, I hired a professional contractor to install a specialized drainage system. The design included rigid metal pipes positioned strategically just below a thin layer of soil. Particularly at the corner where Deborah habitually cut across, I submitted detailed technical drawings and a foundation report to the HOA, along with formal notification of the installation, complete with Amanda's verification signature. The contractor, a gruff man named Frank, who had worked in the area for over 20 years, seemed to understand the situation without me having to explain much. "Corner lot problems, huh?" he remarked as he surveyed the damaged lawn. "Seen this before. Folks think they can just drive wherever they please." He designed a system that was legitimately effective for drainage, while also serving my unstated purpose. Using high-grade stainless steel pipes that would resist corrosion in Florida's humid climate, Deborah and Robert immediately tried to block the project. Claiming it was unnecessary and potentially harmful to the neighborhood aesthetic, Amanda, growing bolder in her opposition to Deborah's tactics, pointed out that foundation protection measures were explicitly permitted under both county regulations and HOA bylaws. With no legitimate grounds for objection, the project proceeded. I installed small warning signs reading, "Area with subsurface drainage system. Not suitable for vehicular traffic." Perfectly legal and subtly ironic given the circumstances. During the installation, Amanda visited to verify compliance with regulations. As we walked the perimeter of my property, she revealed that Deborah was planning to run for city council, using her HOA position to build a reputation as a community standards defender. "She's been doing this for years," Amanda confided, creating problems for residents, then solving them to appear as a neighborhood champion. Most people are too intimidated to challenge her. With my new knowledge of HOA regulations, I began noticing numerous violations at Deborah's own property. A fence 2 inches taller than permitted, unapproved exterior lighting, and landscaping that encroached on common areas. Yet, no violation notices ever appeared in her mailbox. When my drainage system was complete, I replanted the lawn, deliberately leaving a small section that resembled a pathway at the corner, a tempting target for someone accustomed to taking shortcuts. It didn't take long. 3 days after completion, my security cameras captured Deborah's Mercedes approaching the corner of my lawn. She paused, examining the newly replanted grass and, presumably, the small warning signs. After a moment's hesitation, she proceeded to drive across, directly over the concealed drainage pipes. The distinctive sound of metal scraping against her tire was followed by the unmistakable hiss of escaping air. Deborah erupted from her car. Face contorted with rage, she stormed to my front door, pounding furiously while screaming accusations about deliberately sabotaging her vehicle. When I answered, phone recording in hand, she demanded I pay for the damage to her tire and threatened immediate legal action. Within 30 minutes, Officer Kevin Brown arrived in response to Deborah's call. I calmly presented my documentation: HOA-approved drainage system plans, properly posted warning signs, and video evidence showing her deliberately driving across clearly marked private property despite warnings. Officer Brown reviewed everything carefully before turning to Deborah. "Ma'am, I don't see any violation on Mr. Anderson's part. The drainage system is properly documented and approved. The warning signs are clearly visible, and this is private property, not a public roadway. He deliberately designed this to damage vehicles," Deborah insisted, her voice rising. "The system was designed to protect my foundation from water damage. As permitted by county code," I countered evenly, "I have no control over those who choose to drive across my lawn." Despite clear warnings not to do so, the officer's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, perhaps the ghost of a suppressed smile. "I cannot take any action against Mr. Anderson based on the evidence. If you wish to pursue civil litigation, that's your prerogative." Deborah stormed back to her disabled vehicle, phone pressed to her ear, presumably calling for another tow service. "This isn't over," she declared loudly enough for neighbors to hear. "You've made a serious mistake." Later that evening, a text message arrived from Robert. "You've angered the wrong person. You'll pay for this." The threat was concerning but also revealing. It suggested genuine worry on their part that their control was slipping. Michael knocked on my door after dark, his expression troubled. Just heard from Robert's wife. They're planning something big. Something about checking all your home purchase paperwork. Apparently, they think they found something. My heart sank. When purchasing the house, I hadn't hired an independent lawyer. Instead, using the closing attorney provided by the real estate company. And guess who had been the listing real estate agent on my property? That's right, the estimable Deborah Thompson. The next morning, I pulled out every document from my home purchase, spreading them across my dining room table. The stack was intimidating, nearly 200 pages of legal jargon, disclosure forms, and appendices that I had hurriedly initialed during the closing process 6 months earlier. I remembered how excited I'd been that day, barely skimming the documents as I signed where the closing attorney pointed. The attorney, I now recalled with growing unease, had been recommended by Deborah's real estate firm. My software engineering background proved useful as I methodically created a digital index of every document, cross-referencing terms and looking for inconsistencies. I scanned each page into my computer and used optical character recognition software to make the text searchable, organizing everything into folders with timestamps and categories. This systematic approach helped me stay focused, despite the mounting anxiety about what I might find. After hours of scrutiny, I found it buried in Appendix C, final page, in microscopic font, an ambiguous clause about access rights that could be interpreted as permitting passage across the corner of my property. Seller reserves perpetual access and transition rights along established pathways for community connectivity purposes. The wording was masterfully vague, just specific enough to potentially be enforceable, yet ambiguous enough that a typical home buyer would never question it. I realized I had purchased through a real estate company Deborah had specifically recommended, signing standardized paperwork without scrutinizing every appendix. The closing had happened at her preferred title company with her suggested attorney. I had been so focused on securing my dream home that I'd walked right into her carefully constructed trap, unwittingly signing away rights to a portion of my own property. How many others? I wondered aloud, thinking of all the neighbors who had likely gone through the exact same closing process. Was this how Deborah maintained control over the entire neighborhood? By embedding hidden clauses in property deeds? I immediately contacted Amanda, who connected me with a real estate attorney. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, with 20 years of experience in Florida property law, arrived at my home the following morning. She wore a crisp navy suit and carried a weathered leather briefcase that suggested she'd seen her share of real estate conflicts. After reviewing the documents, Patricia confirmed my suspicions. This clause is legally unenforceable, it's improperly placed, ambiguously worded, and wasn't specifically disclosed or agreed to during the purchase process. She explained that such hidden clauses were a known tactic among unethical agents, technically present in the paperwork, but deliberately obscured to avoid detection. "I've seen this kind of thing before," Patricia said, tapping the clause with her pen. "It's a gray area, legally, not quite fraud, but definitely unethical. The clause is intentionally vague about what established pathways means in court. Deborah could claim that the tire tracks across your lawn constitute an established pathway that existed before you purchased the property?" She paused, shaking her head in disgust. "But no judge would uphold this. It wasn't specifically disclosed. It's buried in an appendix in tiny print, and it directly contradicts your property rights under Florida state law." More disturbing was our discovery that similar clauses appeared in several other home purchase contracts throughout the neighborhood, all handled by Deborah's real estate business. It appeared she had been systematically inserting these clauses to maintain control over properties long after selling them. Before I could decide how to proceed with this information, Deborah called an emergency HOA meeting to address what she termed my community disruptive behaviors. The meeting notice listed deliberately hazardous landscaping and hostile actions toward HOA leadership as the primary agenda items. I arrived at the community center with my attorney in tow. Immediately noticing Deborah's surprise at seeing professional legal representation, many residents attended, curiosity evident on their faces. Deborah opened by portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive new resident intent on undermining neighborhood standards. Mr. Anderson has repeatedly flouted long-established community norms, she declared, gesturing dramatically. His latest action, installing dangerous metal objects beneath his lawn, represents a deliberate attempt to cause harm to visitors and violates the spirit of our neighborhood covenant. When my turn came to speak, I presented my findings about the hidden property clauses. Mrs. Thompson has been inserting unenforceable access rights into property deeds, I explained, displaying enlarged copies of the relevant documents. She's been using her position as both HOA president and real estate agent to maintain inappropriate control over private properties she no longer owns. Murmurs spread through the room as neighbors began checking their own paperwork, finding the same clause in many of their documents. Amanda presented a summary of relevant property laws, clearly demonstrating that such hidden clauses violated state real estate regulations. Robert attempted to defend Deborah, claiming the clauses were standard practice and beneficial to neighborhood cohesion. Michael countered by reminding everyone of Robert's own fence dispute the previous year, when Deborah had used similar tactics to force him to relocate a fence at considerable personal expense. "This isn't about neighborhood standards," Michael said, his voice carrying authority from his military background. "This is about one person manipulating rules for personal benefit and punishing anyone who questions her authority." The meeting dissolved into chaos as multiple residents began sharing their own stories of intimidation and selective rule enforcement. Deborah repeatedly tried to regain control, but the tide had clearly turned. Several board members openly called for a vote of no confidence in her leadership. Driving home that evening, I felt a mixture of vindication and apprehension. Something told me Deborah wouldn't surrender her power without a final, desperate counterstrike. My instinct proved correct. Around 2 a.m., my security system alerted me to movement outside. The footage showed several shadowy figures approaching my house, carrying what appeared to be spray cans and tools. I immediately called the police and triggered my exterior floodlights, causing the would-be vandals to flee into the darkness. The morning revealed their failed intentions. My car had been partially spray-painted with the words HOA Hater before they were interrupted. Officer Brown took photographs and a report, but without clear facial identification, there was little hope of prosecution. As I was cleaning the paint off my vehicle, Amanda called with disturbing news. "Deborah has convinced the HOA Executive Committee to conduct a special comprehensive inspection of your property next week," she warned. "They're planning to cite you for every possible violation, no matter how minor. She's telling people privately that she'll force you to sell." I sat on my front porch that evening, staring at my vandalized car, feeling the weight of exhaustion. Was this house worth all this trouble? Should I just sell and move somewhere else? Michael joined me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You can't give up now, Ryan," he said firmly. "This isn't just about you anymore. If Deborah wins this and becomes a city council member, things will only get worse for everyone. We need a new plan, one that Deborah would never anticipate." He showed me his phone, displaying a social media group page titled Victims of Thompson HOA. Share your story. The group already had dozens of members, all with similar experiences of intimidation and abuse. Michael and I spent the next week building our anonymous social media presence, collecting testimonials from current and former residents who had experienced Deborah's tactics. The response was overwhelming, not just from our neighborhood, but from 2 previous communities where Deborah had served as HOA president before moving to our subdivision. Amanda discreetly provided internal documents showing patterns of selective enforcement and questionable financial decisions during Deborah's tenure. Small discrepancies in the HOA accounting raised troubling questions about where certain funds had been allocated. "I've been keeping records for years," Amanda confessed. "I just never had the courage to step forward alone. I've seen what happens to people who challenge her. As the scheduled inspection of my home approached, we organized an informal community meeting to discuss the future of our neighborhood. Michael offered his backyard as a neutral location, and invitations spread through whispered conversations and private messages. Deborah discovered our social media group almost immediately, sending me a certified letter threatening legal action for defamation and slander. The carefully worded letter from her attorney demanded immediate removal of all false and damaging statements and a public retraction. My own attorney responded, noting that truthful accounts of actual experiences were protected speech and that all posts were supported by documented evidence. The legal parrying continued as both sides recognized the potential stakes extended beyond neighborhood politics to professional reputations and possibly Deborah's real estate license. Meanwhile, Robert and several loyalists began constant surveillance of my property, photographing every potential rule violation: a garden hose left unfurled for an hour, a newspaper not retrieved promptly, a slightly overgrown hedge. The psychological warfare was clearly designed to make daily life unbearable. With the inspection looming, we accelerated our plans. I contacted several local journalists, pitching a story about HOA overreach and real estate conflicts of interest. 2 reporters expressed interest, particularly when shown evidence of the hidden property clauses and selective enforcement patterns. Amanda warned me that Deborah was preparing documentation to force a distress sale of my home. Claiming severe and repeated violations made me ineligible for continued residence in the community. Such extreme measures required substantial evidence, which explained the intense scrutiny of my property. The day of the inspection arrived with military precision. Deborah led a 5-person team, including Robert and a private building inspector she had personally hired. Citing structural safety concerns that somehow hadn't been an issue during my purchase 6 months earlier. The inspection was grueling, with Deborah's team documenting dozens of minor issues: a loose gutter fastener, slightly faded trim paint, a hairline crack in a sidewalk paver. The building inspector seemed uncomfortable with the excessive scrutiny, but continued his examination under Deborah's watchful eye. As the inspection concluded, there was a commotion at the street. 2 news vans had arrived, reporters and cameras capturing the entire spectacle. Deborah appeared momentarily flustered, clearly unprepared for media attention. One investigative reporter approached the building inspector, asking pointed questions about his professional relationship with Deborah's real estate company. The inspector's uncomfortable, shifting, and evasive answers drew attention from everyone present. The reporter revealed she had discovered the inspector had received significant payments from companies connected to Deborah's business interests in the past. As tensions escalated, I played my next card. Audio recordings capturing Robert, instructing the inspector to find whatever it takes to force Anderson out. Regardless of actual conditions, the recording had been made during a pre-inspection meeting that Michael had managed to attend under the guise of being a concerned neutral neighbor. The building inspector, facing both professional scrutiny and potential ethical violations, refused to sign Deborah's overly punitive inspection report. Nevertheless, I received notice of a $5,000 fine for accumulated violations the next day. With a 10-day deadline to address all issues or face eviction proceedings, I held the violation notice, feeling as though I were reading a death sentence for my homeownership dream. But as I looked up, I saw Michael smiling confidently, Amanda nodding meaningfully, and behind them nearly 20 neighborhood residents, people who had silently endured Deborah's reign for too long. "Ready for the community meeting now?" Michael asked. I nodded, knowing this would be the final play that evening. While preparing materials for the meeting, I received a text from an unknown number. "I'm Deborah's personal assistant. She has more documents about you than you realize. Meet me at the downtown coffee shop, 8 tomorrow morning." The downtown coffee shop was busy with morning commuters when I arrived. Jessica, Deborah's assistant, was already waiting, nervously checking her watch. She spoke quickly, keeping her voice low. "I've worked for Deborah for 3 years. What she's doing to you, she's done to dozens of others. She slid a flash drive across the table. This contains emails and spreadsheets documenting her long-term strategy to devalue specific properties through HOA harassment, then purchase them below market value through shell companies. The documents revealed a sophisticated operation. Deborah would target homes with specific characteristics: corner lots like mine, properties with aging owners considering downsizing, or families experiencing financial difficulties. She would engineer HOA complaints against these properties, gradually increasing pressure until owners sold at reduced prices to escape the harassment. Her real estate company would broker these distressed sales, often to limited liability companies that, upon closer examination, traced back to Deborah's husband or business partners. "She's planning to flip your house as soon as she forces you out," Jessica explained. "She's already got buyers lined up willing to pay $30,000 above what you paid." The drainage system complication has made her desperate. "She started making mistakes because you're fighting back, armed with this explosive information." I arrived at Michael's house that evening for our community meeting. Over 40 residents attended, along with the local reporters who had covered the inspection. Amanda had officially decided to support us publicly, risking her professional standing in the community, but unwilling to remain silent any longer. Deborah and Robert arrived midway through the meeting, attempting to disrupt proceedings by declaring it an unauthorized gathering that violated HOA rules. The residents, emboldened by numbers and media presence, ignored their protests. I presented the evidence methodically, including Jessica's documents showing the pattern of property manipulation as projected spreadsheets displayed profits from dozens of distressed sales. Audible gasps filled the room. Former victims shared their stories. Families who had lost thousands in forced quick sales. Elderly residents intimidated into selling homes they'd owned for decades. Newcomers driven away before they could establish themselves. Robert, visibly shaken by the mounting evidence, suddenly broke ranks. "I didn't know about the property flipping," he admitted, his voice strained. "She told me we were just maintaining neighborhood standards." He revealed that Deborah had promised him support for a position on her future council staff if he continued helping enforce her HOA agenda. Deborah denied everything, threatening lawsuits against everyone present for character assassination. But her typically commanding presence had diminished, her eyes darting around the room as former supporters distanced themselves from her. Local reporters began asking pointed questions about connections between her real estate business and city officials, about tax filings for the various shell companies, and about the propriety of serving as both HOA president and the area's primary real estate agent. Amanda presented findings from her internal financial audit, revealing several unexplained expenses and accounting irregularities in the HOA finances under Deborah's management. These discrepancies total over $30,000 in the past 2 years alone, she noted, passing copies to the journalists present. The meeting reached its climax when Officer Brown arrived, explaining he had received multiple formal complaints and needed to take statements regarding allegations of fraud, harassment, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Deborah attempted to leave, claiming she needed to consult her attorney. "I'll need your statement now, Mrs. Thompson," Officer Brown insisted firmly. "These are serious allegations that require immediate attention." Cornered and panicking, Deborah lost her carefully maintained composure. "I built this neighborhood," she shouted, her voice cracking. "None of you would have done anything when I was president, you ungrateful people." Her outburst was captured on multiple cell phones, the final nail in her reputational coffin. The HOA members present held an impromptu vote, removing Deborah from her position by an overwhelming margin. Robert abstained, his expression a mixture of shame and relief. The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Amanda was elected interim HOA president, immediately implementing transparency measures and revising the most punitive regulations. Deborah faced investigation by both local authorities and the Real Estate Licensing Board regarding her business practices. All fines against me were rescinded, with compensation approved for the lawn damage and harassment. The community organized a neighborhood barbecue on my fully restored front lawn, complete with a humorous sign reading HOA-approved lawn, may or may not contain spikes. Robert approached me during the celebration, offering a sincere apology. I let myself be manipulated for years, he admitted, explaining he would be selling his house and moving to be closer to his daughter in another state. Sometimes you need to start over. One evening, a few weeks later, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset cast golden light across my now flourishing lawn. Deborah's white Mercedes drove past one final time. Loaded with belongings as she permanently left the neighborhood, Michael joined me, handing me a beer and an official document. Notification that Deborah had withdrawn from the city council race. You know, Michael said thoughtfully, I think we should propose a new HOA regulation about naming neighborhood streets. Maybe we should call the corner by your house Karen's Folly Lane. I laughed and raised my bottle in a toast. To well-maintained lawns and peaceful neighborhoods. Two things no Karen can ever take away. Amanda stopped by later, holding a campaign flyer she'd received from Deborah's new neighborhood across town. Should we warn them? She asked half seriously. I smiled. Maybe they'll learn to plant drainage spikes faster than we did. And that, friends, is how I transformed a lawn battle into an unforgettable lesson for an HOA Karen. Deborah has moved to another city now, reportedly living in a rented apartment without any lawn for her to drive across. Those drainage spikes? I removed most of them after everything settled, keeping just a small section as a reminder. They were just proper water drainage, according to HOA regulations, after all, weren't they? Amanda has made an excellent HOA president, transforming regulations from tools of intimidation into genuine guidelines for building a better community. And if any Karens are watching this and thinking about turning their HOA into a personal fiefdom, remember, sometimes the quietest lawns have the sharpest spikes. This is Ryan Anderson, the man who turned Karen's lawn into Karen's lesson. Hey, drop a comment below if you've had your own experience with an HOA Karen. I know I'm not the only one.